Hey everybody, Brendan Baylod from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. We're back, and this is the Inland Seas Online Shipwreck Festival for those of us who are all hunkered down, cowering in, well, not cowering, but trying not to get this thing. Anyway, my next presentation for the festival is our state underwater archaeologist here in Wisconsin, Tammy Thomsen, and I've talked a lot about Tammy various times on the show. Really, a leader in underwater archaeology, I think worldwide. We have more wrecks on the National Register here in Wisconsin than all other 50 states combined. The majority of those went on under Tammy's purview. Wisconsin puts those on the register for some specific reasons that I think Tammy's going to talk about. This is going to be a great talk, and I wish more states approach the wrecks like we do. So Tammy, thanks so much for doing this, and take it away.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate that. So let me see if I can get up to my screen here. There you go. Can you see that?
Hold on. Yes? I'm going to show it. Give it a second. It'll come up.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, you ready? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about National Register of Historic Places, about listing shipwrecks, districts, and maritime landscapes. So governmental policy. Woo, there's a snoozer for after lunch, huh? But I'm going to talk to you really about my job and how the state of Wisconsin uses the National Register to sort of layer laws in order to protect submerged cultural resources. So other states will have different policies and different laws for how they deal and manage submerged cultural resources. This is how we do it, and maybe that'll give you a little bit of information on how it's done in other states as well. So my predecessors that started this program in 1988 had the ability to go through and foresight to go through historic records, and they discovered that there were 747 shipwrecks losses in Wisconsin water. Those are commercial vessels that are located mostly in the Great Lakes, but some of our inland waterways as well. And this number is a floating number. We have a volunteer, Tom Villan, that looks at these reports comes in every 3 days. Well, when we were in the office, he did. And so that number is adjusted daily. And so this was our latest number on our website. And of those, we have located 193 of them. So, and that's not necessarily us, but other shipwreck hunters in our states has found those. So there's a lot of work to be done still in Wisconsin waters. And as far as our office's job to evaluate all that has been discovered, we're still in a backlog situation. So we're getting out to look at them and to really make an analysis of them as much as we can. So as far as our state waters, what we have is from the lower border of Wisconsin, it extends along our border out into Lake Michigan, up through pretty much the middle of Lake Michigan, cuts through the Rock Island Passage, and then goes over into Marinette. We also have a little bit of Lake Superior, which encompasses the Apostle Islands and then sort of zigzags in to the twin ports of Duluth and Superior. We also have inland waterways. On our western boundary is the Mississippi River. We have commercial watercraft that traffic the Wisconsin, the Fox River, Lake Winnebago, the Wolf River, and other inland waterways of the state. So the way that we manage resources, submerged cultural resources, is a combination of state and federal law. So we have in Wisconsin, the shipwreck sites are archaeological sites. So they're classified as such under 4447, 4448 of our state code. And so they are protected and penalized for looting and damage to them as such under that law. Also, if there were any burials or deaths, human remains that remain with a shipwreck site, those are protected under state burial law. So the way that it works really is to sort of make a mesh or network of these laws in order to protect the resources as best we can. And there's several federal laws that also come into play. One is the Antiquities Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, and the Abandoned Shipwreck Act of 1987. I'm primarily today going to talk with you about the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, although we could have a whole nother conversation on all the other protection laws that there are. So the Abandoned Shipwreck Act was actually passed by Congress in 1987. And this gave title and management responsibility of those resources to the state. These are any submerged cultural resources, including shipwrecks that are on state waters and submerged lands of the state. So provisions of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act were that the shipwreck or the submerged cultural resource was embedded in the submerged lands. So embedded, how embedded is embedded, and that's really something that you could argue in court. In fact, it has been argued in court.
Tammy,
Tammy,
can I interrupt a second? I'm going to have to bounce the session. They're saying they can't see your presentation. Hold on just a second. I think I'll have it back in a moment.
Okay, where would you like me to restart?
Just this slide.
Okay.
And can you reshare your presentation?
Yeah. Go here.
And
how about that?
Give it a second. All right. Please note if you can't see it. Are people seeing the presentation? Anybody? Can we see it? Yes, no? No comments. Yes, they're seeing it. Okay, cool. Carry on, Tammy. Sorry.
Would you like me to start here, or do you want me to back up one?
We have time. Why don't you back up a few?
Okay. So I had talked about different kinds of layering of laws. So for shipwreck sites in the state of Wisconsin, they're categorized as archaeological sites. So they are protected under 44, 47, and 44, 48 of our state code. Those that have human remains are also protected under the state burial laws. So we've cataloged those, and they are all listed as official burial sites within the state of Wisconsin. Now, the way that you protect the submerged cultural resources is really this layering of state and federal laws. And there's a number of federal laws that come into play that can also protect shipwrecks. One is the Antiquities Act. The other is the National Historic Preservation Act. And then the final one, which we'll cover today, is going to be the Abandoned Shipwreck Act of 1987. And that one really is the one that the passing of that really did change the way that our office does business. So this is the Abandoned Shipwreck Act. Abandoned Shipwreck Act was passed by Congress in 1987, and it gave title to submerged cultural resources, shipwrecks included in that list, to the states. And those were resources that were on the state, in state waters and on state submerged lands. There are various provisions that are part of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, and that would be that the shipwreck or submerged cultural resource is embedded in submerged lands. So it's embedded in the lake bed. How embedded is embedded, and this is something really that's argued in court. It's been argued in court, and a little ambiguous. So, and then it's embedded in coralline structure, and we don't have coralline structure here in the Great Lakes, so that one's sort of discounted. Then determined eligible for the National Register of Historic Places or listed in the National Register of Historic Places. So this is where there's a little difference between the states. Determined eligible is actually a listing within the purview of the National Register office, or it could be an office determination that's made at the state level by the State Historic Preservation Office. And so there's differences there definitely between Wisconsin and Minnesota in what determining eligible is. And so we assumed the higher standard of this that determined eligible was that made by the keeper. So we use in Wisconsin the National Register as one of the methods of protecting shipwrecks. So, and because of that, Wisconsin has more shipwrecks individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places than any other state. We have 75 that have been listed in the National Register, and some of those are within 3 submerged archaeological historic districts. So the National Register is actually led by the National Park Service. The director of the program is the keeper of the register. And because of this, they have provided guidance for how to list shipwrecks and historic vessels to the National Register. And this is one of their white papers on what you would need to use for evaluation. And this is something that we do. So when someone finds a new shipwreck, and my coworker Caitlin and I go out to take a look at it, we are looking at it under the scrutiny of whether we believe that should we be able to process the paperwork and provide additional documentation if we could list the shipwreck on the register. So from the time someone finds a shipwreck, we would go out and look at it and do an initial evaluation. After that, we would seek funding to be able to conduct an archaeological survey. This is a phase 2 archaeological survey. We would lay a tape down the middle of the shipwreck. Divers are assigned to 10-foot sections of the shipwreck, and they're drawing to scale what it is that they see. They're collecting all sorts of details on remaining structure of the shipwreck, the build and construction, anything that they can to develop a site plan and an understanding of what this resource is. The other thing that we do is we catalog all of the artifacts that are remaining with the shipwreck. So this does not mean bringing them up. In fact, in my 16 years of working for the office, we haven't brought up an artifact at all. We take measurements and pictures, we place things back in place, but we want to share what is down there and understand the true breadth of the cultural materials that remain with the shipwreck. We also want it to be so that it's a new discovery for divers that go down and will experience a shipwreck, so that every time it's new, that there isn't things that are missing because we took them out, but that this can be really something that they can treasure and preserve and want to come and visit our resources and share them and protect them for generations to come. So those are phase 2 surveys. We also do phase 1 surveys. This is Evan Kovacs's Pixel ROV, which is from Marine Imaging Technologies, his business, and Tom Crossman, Crossman Consulting's boat. We go out and we will do visual observance of the shipwrecks. We will use ROVs to, with sonar data, to collect information and to be able to take measurements along with video and pictures of the wreck site. So for those that are deeper, we're able to get at least this baseline data of what the shipwreck sites look like. So the National Register actually has a review process. So once we've gone out and we've collected the data, we then process it into a form, and that form is submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office. We have at the state level a National Register coordinator. And she processes, her name is Peggy Verrigan, and she processes the document, makes sure that we have checked in all of the information that needs to come with the application form. And then they do another review in the office to see if we have made a viable argument for listing this on the register. Once that is done, there's a Historic Preservation Review Board. That board consists of individuals who are appointed by the governor, and they meet quarterly to review nominations to the National Register. These people have experience and knowledge of history, architecture, and anthropology. Most of the anthropology committee are archaeologists, so by trade. So they then meet in a subcommittee, and they discuss the nominations, and then they will make a full nomination to the full board, and it will either pass or be sent back for edits and review. Once that's done, the State Historic Preservation Officer has a final say on whether the nomination will be passed on and listed to the State Register of Historic Places. At that point, all of the nominations are sent up to the National Park Service. So the Park Service then will do a review of the document, and then they meet weekly with various specialists for different nominations, and then those where arguments have been made that fulfill the need of listing will be listed on the National Register. So usually the whole process from beginning to end, finding a new shipwreck and getting the logistics of being able to collect the data and going through all of this review process takes about a year to 2 years to have a shipwreck listed. So there's a lot of things that are in the pipeline always for us. I wanted to take you through quickly a form and what it looks like for a National Register form when we submit these. Just you can see the extent of work and knowledge that we need to put into them. This is for the Thomas Bryant. It's a gillnet tug, which is lost in Lake Superior. So we see here that we have the name on the front page here. We have a site description. The second page, in these forms are actually used also for houses and buildings that people may be wanting to add to the National Register in order to get a tax credit. So you'll see that there's a lot of things like how many buildings and structures are on your property. So those type of things still need to be filled out. And what's interesting is in the middle of this screen here, you can see where it says Great Lakes Shipwrecks of Wisconsin under the MultiProperty Document. That document was actually created in 1992 by Dave Cooper and Paul Creasa, and it gives baseline knowledge for vessel types, typology, and different services that the ships participated in during their time afloat. And so when it falls into those different categories, then we don't have to elaborate on our form. We can just refer back to that multi-properties document. The function and use come from listings within the National Register guidance. And then this page is also a little important. We can see that there are multiple criteria for listing shipwrecks. Criteria A is broad patterns of history, and I'm going to give you examples of this later. So we'll come back to this too. B is for persons of significant in our past. C would be for the work of a master. And D is where most of the shipwrecks and archaeological sites fall, which is the property has yielded or is likely to yield information important to prehistory history. So it's not exclusive to just have D listed in a document. It may be a combination of D and B or B, C, and D, or so on. But only one of those really does need to be selected in order to list a shipwreck to the register. We see on the other column that we have a period of significance. The period of significance then is from the build date to the sinking. The significant dates that are listed below that are dates of structural change to the vessel. And if we go all the way to the bottom, the architect or the builder is usually listed at the bottom, or the shipyard too, if it was made at a prominent shipyard. So information on geographical data, on form preparation, and then ownership. So this particular shipwreck is in state waters, and so the Wisconsin Board of Commissioners of Land is listed as the owner of the shipwreck, but it is actually the citizens of the state of Wisconsin that do own that shipwreck. So when we get into the real meat of the nomination, it starts out with an introduction and then a site description. And that site description in section 7 includes where it is located, but also who found it. In this case, it was Ken Merriman, Jerry Eliason, Craig Smith, and Randy Beebe, and then how often it had been visited by divers and what type of survey we're going to conduct on the shipwrecks. This is a phase 2 survey. We're using Crossman Consulting. And then we go on to an elaborate description of every part that we have access to on this ship to get through this. This is 10 pages of description in depth of what we're seeing on the shipwreck. Going on to section 8 is where we start making our argument as to why it fits the criteria and why it is significant and why it should be listed to the register. So there's a summary statement. And after this, we would write in, if we didn't refer back to that multi-properties document, we would write in a description of the service that this vessel participated in, or what made it unique, why it didn't quite fit those vessel types that were described, or the type of service that was described in multi-property. So here we point back to the multi-property, and then we get into the operational history of the vessel itself. So built in 1883, and it goes through ownership changes and changes to the construction features and the look of the vessel, and on until we get to the archaeological significance. And this is where we really need to reinforce that because it's an archaeological site, we've learned a lot of information from this. It's added to our knowledge of what this vessel type is, but it also has potential to add more information. As technologies change and they become more available to us, there certainly will be better data that we can get in the future. So, and from there we go on to references, and finally a verbal description of the boundary, and then photographs. So Ken Merriman provided us with a number of photographs for this. Here's the binnacle. These are the fishing licenses. So this was a steamer converted into a fish tug. So those are still in existence, tacked onto the wheelhouse. Some of the early fishing equipment from the 1920s still remains a fish scale. The bell is on the pilot house and remains there. Paint, the name is painted in Thomas Bryant onto the wheelhouse as well. Different features, and then historic images. So here's its original iteration of design. So it was used for the inland waterways of Michigan. It was reinforced for use on the lakes, and then later it turned into a fish tug. And finally, a map of its location and where it rests on the bottom today. So that line between Minnesota and Wisconsin is defined in state statute, and we were a little nervous for a while that this one was going to be real close to the line and maybe even over on the other side, but it was not. So let me tell you a little bit about a couple of the shipwrecks that we have listed and how they list in various categories. So we had mentioned that areas of significance A, B, C, and D. So all of these, of course, are listed under D, but they may have had something added. So this is my friend Susie Johnson's shoe. So she's a power parachutist. She's a retired bookkeeper from Two Rivers, Wisconsin. She took up power parachuting because she wanted something exciting to do with her life. And she started discovering shipwrecks, and she found 8 different shipwrecks that had washed out of the sand on Raleigh Point, just north of Two Rivers. So her daughter sent me this picture and said, my mom took up flying and she thinks she sees things like shipwrecks. And well, certainly that is a shipwreck. So we went out there right away after this was reported to us, put a tape measure on it because you never know when the sand's going to wash back over the thing. And we were able to determine, based on our database of vessel losses and the length of this particular ship, which was 154 feet, that this was the Barkentine Major Anderson. So it's an interesting name. Major Anderson was built in 1861. Major Anderson, of course, was the commander of Union forces at the Battle of Fort Sumter. And in fact, the owner of this particular ship was such a Union supporter that he commissioned a painting of the Battle of Fort Sumter to be spread across her stern. So this is a pretty interesting ship. There were actually 4 ships named Major Anderson on the Great Lakes that were built in 1861. But interesting enough, she ran aground in 1871 on Raleigh Point. She became lost in quicksand and could not be recovered. And so she sank down sort of into this coagulated sand and has remained there today, very much intact. You can see that her deck beams are still there, still has deck planking. It's a pretty amazingly intact vessel. Intactness is really something that we look for National Register sites. So how much of these construction features are present and how much have do not remain with the site. So the interesting thing about Major Anderson, though, is her connection to this. So this is a picture of the Great Chicago Fire, but actually regional fires swept our area. And when the Major Anderson sank was when the Peshtigo fire, the fire, more northern fire, was coming through Wisconsin. And it would have looked nothing like this. There would have been smoke that came out onto the lake that caused such a disruption to their navigation. They couldn't see, and that's how they came aground on Raleigh Point. So this particular vessel not only is listed under Criterion D as an archaeological site, but is listed under A for significant contribution to periods of history. The next shipwreck that I wanted to talk to you about is the Galley Nipper. And the Galley Nipper is located in 210 feet of water, and she is off of Sheboygan, Wisconsin. This is the oldest known shipwreck that we have in Wisconsin waters. She was built in 1832, and that in itself would really be some reason, very early schooner construction would be a reason to list this particular ship. But that's not it, of course. So, and that is really because of her connection to this man. This is Michael Dowsman. Michael Dowsman was the Western agent for the John Jacob Astor American Fur Company. And when the Western frontier was in Mackinac Island, he commissioned the build of the Nancy Dowsman, which was the original name of the ship. And he used her to bring furs to Buffalo and supplies and passengers back to Mackinac. And really when Milwaukee was developing as a port, and they had not dredged the port. They wrote to the government and they asked for dredging operations to commence so that they could begin a warehouse operation there. And Michael Dowsman sent one of his middle children, George, and another one named Talbot, down to Milwaukee to open a warehouse there. And in doing so, they lengthened the Nancy Dowsman and renamed her the Galley Nipper, and she brought supplies then to the city of Milwaukee. Interestingly enough, the Dowsman name is very pervasive in Wisconsin history. We have a town named Dowsman here. There are streets in Green Bay that are named Talbot and George, and so they're all named for this family. And Hercules Dowsman, his oldest son, ran the warehouse in Green Bay, and when the frontier moved west, Hercules Dowsman moved west with it to the confluence of the Wisconsin and the Mississippi rivers. He established a fur post there, and that is now one of our state historic sites called Villa Louie. So very important to Wisconsin history. Another example that I'd like to give you is of the Appomattox. So this is my coworker, Caitlin's aunt. So, and you can see that this particular shipwreck is filleted out, filet schooner, as Brendan said, not schooner. This is a steamer. And it's this is one of James Davidson's vessels. So there's it was a 319-foot ship. She was the longest wooden bulk carrier when she was constructed, which was 1896. She was lost in 1905, just north of Milwaukee, off the village, what's the village of Shorewood now. What happened is that there was an industrial fog or smog that was out over the lake. Seems a familiar story. And another big steamer named the Iowa had stranded. Getting confused by the lights, the Appomattox came a little bit close and mistakenly thought that the Iowa was the entrance to the harbor and grounded there as well. They couldn't get this one off. She ended up breaking up, and there's almost 3 football fields worth of oak on the bottom here. It's massive, and it's a massive site. You can see the floor keelsons here. There's a reinforced framing. They have triple framing, hogging trusses, basket weave, all of the essential pieces which make this a Davidson ship. And that's why this is listed, is because of the connection to James Davidson. We just heard Wes's talk about Davidson and Davidson Shipyard and the importance of his construction. He built over 100 vessels there at his yard in West Bay City, Michigan. And he was always there with these engineering feats, making these large wooden bulk carriers, wooden bulk schooners. He used most of them for his own purposes before selling them on to others. He did some commission work as well. But what's important to understand was really he had the foresight to buy vast tracts of lumber. So when his competitors had switched to steel and steel shipbuilding, he could build these large wooden vessels at a fraction of the price. So he was really ahead in the market that way, and really the demise of the lumber industry really was the thing that took out his shipyard eventually. We also look at vessel types and really expanding our knowledge of them. This is the Walter B. Allen. The Walter B. Allen was actually lost in 1880 in the Manitous. Sank there. They sent a pump up from Chicago. She was filled with corn. Pumped her out, towed her across the lake to Manitowoc. And Manitowoc said, "We can't take your wet corn. You're going to have to continue south." As they continued south, the pump gave out, and the ship sank south of Sheboygan. So you can still see in the background of this photo, the pump still sitting on the deck. And she's like, this was a canaler. So this is a specific vessel that was built for the Great Lakes and Great Lakes trade. It was built for going through transiting the Welland Canal locks. So these particular locks, the lock box was 140 3 feet long. It was 26 feet wide, or 26.6 feet wide. So the beam on this boat is 26 feet, 3 inches to spare on either side to get her through. So they had some innovative features that they introduced with canalers. And this is across builders, and we can also see with some of the archaeological sites that we have on the bottom, we're able to compare this sort of evolution of design that happens as builders are learning more and trying to add more construction features to it. So as you see here on either side of the bowsprit, you see that there are pins. Those could be pulled, and then the bowsprit could be retracted or pivoted up into the rigging. They would take a block and tackle. They would pull this up so that with this bluff bow and really square build of the ship could fit in and not take as much space up in the lockbox. So more ship in the lock box meant that there, and less overhanging things meant that there was more cargo that could get through, and there was more money that could be made with this particular ship. Remember, it's all about commodity and commerce. The other thing that you see here is you can see the cathead. The divers blocking the other side would have supported the anchor. This was also pivoting, so it could rotate in back to the ship, and the anchor could be brought aboard, so there wouldn't be anything hanging over the bow of the ship to get caught on the locks as they lowered or raised the vessel. off the stern they had davits, and the davits would support the yawl boat or the work boat. And these also would either rotate or pivot. We've looked at 9 different canalers, and we've completed a comparative analysis of all of these, so we sort of understand these design features. So this one was added because it's an interesting vessel. It's intact, it has the integrity, but it adds to our understanding of really the vessel typology and this sort of range of features that could be constructed on this type of vessel. Again, very unique to the Great Lakes because of its build to fit through that Welland Canal lock. The other vessel that we're looking at and that we've just completed a survey of is all of the scow schooners in the state. This is the Ocean Wave. The Ocean Wave was carrying stone. The Ocean Wave was found in 2005. It had been a net hang from some fishermen. And they sent Randy Wallander, one of the local divers, down to retrieve the net. And in doing so, he discovered there was a shipwreck. And so this is it. So scow schooners were really these handyman specials. They didn't take a lot of shipwright skill to be able to construct. So they were very boxy, very upright bow and sides. They had a really sharp turn of the bilge. In fact, there was no turn of the bilge. They had keel chine logs that made the corners of the vessel. So they were very much like a barge would be today, square and boxy. And they had shallow drafts, so they could get into unimproved ports. But this was the entry point for a lot of immigrants into the maritime trade. They could come here with very little skills. They could build these type of ships on the shores or on a river, and they could launch them and be able to immediately support their families. And we see by looking really at how these vessels then were shared and traded after their original owner. They were given to other family members. They were used to really build maritime empires for a lot of people. This particular one is very interesting because, although it was a handyman special and kind of something anybody could build, there was a lot of thought put into a lot of the features. If you look just under the bowsprit here, this is a screaming eagle figurehead. And up until a few years ago when the quagga mussels came in and were very prevalent, and became more prevalent, you could see paint on its outstretched tongue, and you could also see paint within the eyes of the figurehead. So again, very unique features, shows us a sort of broad range in design, and contributes to our understanding of the vessel type. And that's why this one was listed. We have, I think, 10 of these now that we've looked at. We've completed a comparative analysis. We just had an intern here, Tori Galloway from Indiana University, who looked at all of these vessel types. And what's interesting enough is that the design of scow schooners was then carried to New Zealand. And the scows of New Zealand are based on designs that were used here on the Great Lakes. Isn't that cool? So okay, so we also, because we're listing so many of these, we're stretching and expanding the rulings of the National Register. It used to be that they needed to have pictures, like real pictures of shipwrecks, to be able to go with the nomination. Well, this is the Senator. The Senator was lost in 1929. In 2014, we were given numbers for the shipwreck by the Wisconsin DNR. It was located in 450 feet of water in a sinkhole off of Port Washington. And we went out to it in December 1st with Tom Crossman. Because of its location, there was a lot of debris in the water, a lot of particulate that was blowing off the edge of the sinkhole, and it was obscuring the ability for us to use the video camera on the little video ray. The lights were a little too close to the lens for as much particulate was in the water. So we turned off the lights, and we did the survey by sonar only. And you can see here in this image, the pilot house. You can see the communication pole here. You can see the lifeboat over to the side in the sand. And then the most unique feature is this double car elevator in the center. So this is a composite of images making a photo mosaic of this 400-foot shipwreck in 400 feet of over 400 feet of water. And we turned this in, and we didn't think that it would go because, again, they wanted real images. So we sent it in as a judgment call to the keeper, and we asked for a determination of eligibility. And he was willing to give that to us, which again gave us that layering of laws with the abandoned shipwreck to protect this and protect its cargo. When it sank in 1929, this was 2 days after the stock market crash. It was carrying actually a load of 268 Nash automobiles, but we can see that very distinctive double car elevator there in the center. Nicholson Transportation Company was taking a lot of these bulk carriers, and they were converting them for use in the automobile industry, and they were adding various car elevators to them. So this was very, very specific to this vessel that this one was at. And you see they had a deck load of cars. And if we go back to the image, there's no deck load of cars here. So where are the cars? That's definitely something that we were looking for on here. And we couldn't show also that there was any in the cargo. We kind of had an idea that they were there. So we, again, asked for that determination of eligibility, and we were granted that. But we wanted to go back. So we took Evan Kovacs with Marine Imaging Technologies with us, and we were able to stick his ROV inside the hold of the vessel and capture images of some of those 1929 Nash automobiles. So the ones that are at least inside the ship, two layers of them are still chained in place and are still in pretty good shape inside the hull of that particular vessel. So that's a pretty cool story. And again, they were willing to accept the nomination, but we knew that we would be able to give them more information. And so that's why the termination of eligibility came. Not all shipwrecks are eligible for the National Register. So this is the Lady Ellen. This is a scow schooner, which is in the Anape River in Algoma, Wisconsin. This is me, I'm surveying it. Because it's in a riverway, riparian rights come into play. So the landowner that's adjacent to this is a defunct cookware company, and we couldn't track down who really the owner of the property was. It had gone through a couple sales with banks, and it didn't have the integrity. A lot of the pieces have been destroyed or washed away. The river is subject to high ice flows, and so we were happy to gather the information and put it in the archaeological record, but it wasn't worth us pushing the limits of the register to see if we should list this. It just was not as valuable to us. So not everything has the integrity and can give us the information to be able to make it worthy of listing on the register. Okay, districts. So some sites are bigger than just a single object. And an example of a district that we've done is one called Jacksonport. Jacksonport is in Door County, so the peninsula that runs north of Sturgeon, runs north of Sturgeon Bay, is Door Peninsula. And this is halfway up the peninsula, and it used to be a very prolific lumber port. So there were 3 piers that were associated with it and a number of shipwrecks. And so over the course of 10 years, we went out and surveyed the various piers. I like this. I call this pier henge. And this is Reynolds Pier, the southernmost pier, and this would have been the second pier built. But associated with many of the piers also are wrecks, people that or vessels that had been caught loading lumber when a storm came up. They set anchor, dragged anchor, and were pushed ashore and unable to be salvaged. So this is Crystal Waller, one of our volunteers, who is surveying the Annie Doll, the furthest north wreck. So in piecing together the archaeological information that we had, we see that we have the furthest north pier, the Hibbard Pier, the first pier, very lightly built, 1868, we see that just a few posts remain that made up the pier. The second pier, a little bit more robust, was the Reynolds Pier down at the bottom. And there are two shipwrecks associated with this, the Perry Hannah and the Cecilia. And in the center, the Lemires Pier, the newest pier, but a fishing pier and very robust in construction. After a few storms, we actually found that there was a pond net boat that was associated with Lemires Pier that also became available to us, and we surveyed that. And through an update to the register, we were able to add that. So basically the whole bay associated with Jacksonport and this lumber community that's no longer there, it's kind of a ghost town, has been listed because of the associated archaeological district, which is now underwater. And then landscape. So I had the opportunity a couple years ago, so I do work for the state of Wisconsin, but I had the opportunity to work with Great Lakes Shipwreck Preservation Society in Minnesota. And Minnesota has this great thing called legacy grants. So they take a certain percentage of sales taxes and they let that go to historic preservation projects. And we worked together to try to get one of those legacy grants to go up and look at the Madeira. The Madeira, if you don't know, is a very popular dive site, which is up the Minnesota North Shore. So Madeira was built in 1900. It was a steel-hulled schooner barge. And it was lost in 1905 in a storm. It was being towed by the steamer Edenborn and set it free in a storm and came to strike Gold Point rock. So it's not gold, but it is a rock. And you can see the buoys here that mark the shipwreck. Those are put out by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Preservation Society. And so you can see the association with the rock. In fact, as the schooner wrecked, one of the crew members ended up valiantly climbing the rock and rescuing 8 others from the ship. So it does have this connection to a geological feature as well. So again, the shipwreck's very popular. It's a shore dive on the North Shore. It's easier to go by boat, obviously, but the GLSPS has worked with the DNR to put a parking lot and a trail in for divers to make it easy to go and visit the remains of the wreck. So we wanted to look at that. Minnesota has a mandate to look at and review all of their National Register listing properties every 10 years. And so we were able to go back out and reevaluate the boundary which was set for the shipwreck site. The other thing that's interesting in association with this is Split Rock Lighthouse. It's on the next point down. And Split Rock Lighthouse actually was put in as partially in result of this accident that happened from the Madeira. And so the reason for this being there was very much connected to the shipwreck. And the lighthouse itself is a national landmark. So again, the cream of the crop of National Register listings is another process, the national landmark process. And beyond that even, so we see the Split Rock Lighthouse in the center here, there's a bay down in the side here. When Madeira was being salvaged, there was a salvage attempt that was made on it. The salvage operation was in this bay that's just further down the coast from the Split Rock Lighthouse. So if we're looking at this and we're looking at it holistically, could we not make a good point for not just the shipwreck to be listed, although it is listed, but to look at the landscape holistically and say it's not just the shipwreck, it's Gold Point Rock. It's not just the shipwreck and Gold Point Rock, but it's the resulting lighthouse at Split Rock. And we can even go so far as saying it's the salvage site, which is also part of the history of this ship, and list this whole area as a landscape district. And so as we were thinking about this, the National Register Office actually held a symposium in Madison, where I am, and on the cover, believe it or not, of the Maritime Cultural Landscape Symposium is a picture of Split Rock Lighthouse. So pretty obvious to me, right, that this is indeed a landscape if there ever was one. So we don't have any landscapes that we've listed in Wisconsin. We have, and even this district that we're considering with the state of Minnesota. They haven't moved forward with it, but it's a management strategy to really look at how things are connected. It may not just be one piece, but multiple pieces that come together to tell really a broader story. So I hope I haven't bored you, and this is a real snoozer for a lot of people, governmental policy and all. But so we go out and we look at about 4 or 5 shipwrecks a year. We do publish all of, because we're a state agency and open and all of that, we publish all of our results under this Learn tab on our website, wisconsinshipwrecks.org. It is a partner website, which we run with in partnership with University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute. And you can go on there and look at all of these in-depth histories and archaeological reports under the Learn tab. And then in there is technical field reports. If you want to look at individual shipwrecks in Wisconsin, you can look at the Shipwreck tab. Lighthouses, museums, and such are under attractions. And if you do want to get a hold of me and you have any questions, because I've gone really fast, you can get the Contact Us button, and that contacts me. So I hope that got everybody's questions for National Register, and I didn't lose anybody in the process of this. But thank you.
Tammy, thanks so much. What a great talk. Let me just minimize and maximize where needed. And wow, there was a lot of great material there. A couple of quick questions that came across that I'd like to field. Let's see if we get these in 5 minutes. Jerry Eliason waiting in the green room.
I can also come to the party at the end and answer these.
You can, but these are going to be some. Who can write a National Register nomination? Does it have to be an archaeologist, or who can do it?
So the states have they have regulations for who can write them. So you're going to have to look at your various state. For us, we have consultants, so you have to make it onto the consultant list in order to qualify to write it. So, but if someone's interested in helping us out, I certainly will help them. So, again, we have backlog of information. So,
another question that was asked that I thought was very interesting. Somebody wanted to know about the senator. What if the insurance company that paid claims on the senator wanted to recover those cars? What would they have to do? Is that a thing?
So recovery could be done. In fact, on any of these shipwrecks, they have to apply for a permit. There's a Wisconsin lands permit. So if you feel that there needs to be a need to remove some item, that it's in peril, then you could apply to the state archaeologist through a permit and tell him how you were going to go about doing this, what the curation would be, and what the forever protection of this artifact would be. That's where the big expense comes in. So we have a lot of people that try to, want to recover anchors, and that forever protection can't be me restoring the anchors always. So, that type of, that's smaller, but much bigger picture type stuff.
Cool. Well, thanks for clearing that up. I think a lot of people wonder about that. It's like, well, geez, can't you raise those cars? And I think I remember didn't they bring a car up from the Lakeland and it turned into red powder within 6 months because to preserve it. Yeah, you'd have to put an electrolytic bath for like a year or something. And the cost to recover that car, there's a lot of 29 Nashes out there in collectors' garages right now that you could buy a lot cheaper.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, Tammy, thanks so much. What a wonderful presentation, and especially walking through the different types of wrecks and why they're on the National Register, and the wrecks that aren't and why they're not. Just amazing information. Thanks so much for doing this, and thanks for everything you do here in Wisconsin for preserving and interpreting our maritime heritage. You're a real treasure for our state. Thanks so much.
Thank you.